What's up, guys? Nice, easy win last night on the one play that I had on James Madison. Dominant win. They're just the way better team. They won the Sun Belt. Congratulations to them. They will be in the big dance, probably somewhere around a 12 seed. And we also had an auto bid clinch in the SoCon from Samford, who was the number one team in that conference. Although I consider them to be a little bit beatable, man. But they got it done. They got to face the 7 seed in the conference, although they beat Furman prior to that, which was a reasonably tough matchup. And East Tennessee gave them pretty much all they could handle last night, really, even though Samford was able to build a lead in the second half and it looked like the game was over. East Tennessee refused to go away. And then if you watch the end of that game, that was some of the worst free throw shooting I've probably ever seen on the side of both teams. Both teams were just missing free throws all over the place. It was crazy how many free throws were missing. Crazy how many extra possessions Samford gave East Tennessee at the end there. Samford is the team that has more size out of those two teams, and it was like they just couldn't get a rebound, and they just kept letting East Tennessee get offensive rebounds and get the ball back repeatedly. And somehow Samford's lead didn't slip below like 5 or 4 points or something, and they were still able to win. Congratulations to them. They will probably be somewhere maybe on the 12 or 13 line in the tournament. Today, college basketball, we have a few more finals in some of these conference tournaments. The Colonial, Stony Brook as the 7 seed is making their own Cinderella run there up into the final here. They had another nice win last night, an upset win of Hofstra. They've pulled off a couple of upsets here in this tournament, and they now run into the 1 seed, who is also the best team, KenPom rankings-wise, in this conference in Charleston. And Charleston was on the ropes last night, man. They were losing by, I don't know, like 6 or 7 points with like a couple of minutes left. It looked like they were done. Looked like Towson was going to eliminate them, and then Charleston ended the game on something like a 13-1 run or something like that and won the game. That was a crazy run to end the game on for Charleston to get out of there with the win, but that might maybe even put a little bit of a scare into Charleston here. I think this might be where the end of the road is for Stony Brook here. The Cinderella might hit their midnight here, let's say, kind of like it did for East Tennessee and Arkansas State to an extent, I guess, and Texas State, all those teams. Once they finally run into a team that's definitely better than they are, and it's in a game that matters, and that team is probably going to be focused. It tends to not work out that well for the team that's not as good. Charleston's a 9-point favorite here. I don't want to lay the points with Charleston here. Both teams obviously have reason to be motivated here with the conference championship and a trip to the big dance on the line, but Charleston is definitely the better team out of the two. Stony Brook has been a pretty welcome surprise running through that tournament, though. And they're one of the newcomers to that Colonial. I don't want to call it the Coastal. I hate this PC bullshit. The Colonial, one of the newcomers to the Colonial. So they're doing pretty well in that tournament, making noise. The Horizon Championship is also tonight after those teams in the Horizon had a bunch of time off before they played the semifinals last night. In the semifinals, Wisconsin-Milwaukee was able to knock out the returning champs in Northern Kentucky, who I think have won that conference at least a couple times within the last like 3 or 4 years. Milwaukee, as the 6th seed, somehow has made it to the final where they are down to a 4-point underdog, where it looks like this opened as a 5-point Oakland favorite, down to a 4-point favorite. Oakland was able to win last night against, who do they even play? Was it Cleveland State? I don't even remember. I had that game on and it's like not even in my mind. I don't even remember what happened in that game. Oakland won. I don't think they won it by that much though, but this is another one of those where I don't know why the line is moving against Oakland, because I do think Wisconsin-Milwaukee might be in a little bit of trouble here, even though they're making a nice run here. They're kind of beating teams that really, I don't think are as good. Like Green Bay even though Green Bay was near the top of the conference, they are not one of the best teams in the conference. And then beating Northern Kentucky. I mean, Northern Kentucky's fairly good as far as the Horizon is concerned, but it's a little bit of a down year for them. And now they run into a team, Oakland, that plays better defense and is a better paint presence. And I think that could be a problem for Milwaukee, who I don't think is very good at both. Milwaukee is really bad defensively, actually one of the worst teams in this conference defensively. So I don't really expect Milwaukee to be able to win this game, but that being said, there's going to be some like wild result in at least one of these games. So who knows? I guess it could be this one. And then the other final is the Northeastern Conference, or there are two more. Northeastern Conference, Wagner and Merrimack. Merrimack is definitely the best team in this conference, actually kind of significantly, even though no team in this conference is very good. Merrimack, I think, is also playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because they actually won the conference last year, but they were still in the transition period, as I have mentioned a couple of times on this channel. So they won the conference tournament, but were ineligible to get into the big dance. And they saw Fairleigh Dickinson get in and win in the first four and then pull off an upset of Purdue in a 16-1. So Merrimack sitting there thinking, well, that should have been us. So I think that makes them have a pretty big chip on their shoulder, and they get Wagner in this one. Wagner's pulled off two upsets during this tournament, although I guess somewhat mild upsets of the 3 and the 2 seed. I think Wagner's the 5 or the 6. I think this conference reshuffled in the semifinals. I think they reshuffled the seeds. I don't even know. Or so Central Connecticut was the 1 seed, and they got to face the lower of the seeds that was remaining, which was Wagner, and Wagner upset them after Wagner had upset who did they upset before that? Sacred Heart, I think, was the 3. A bit of a mild upset there. So Wagner playing pretty well. They are one of the better teams in this conference over the last several years. Wagner has been one of the top teams in this conference, really. So Merrimack is a newcomer, but Merrimack is a 7.5-point favorite. I don't want to lay the points with Merrimack just because I've seen them play, and Wagner plays a pretty good brand of basketball. And at least as far as the Northeastern Conference is concerned, Merrimack is also good and has a couple of the best players in the conference, but their ball handling is just really bad, man. They almost completely blew that game against Lemoyne, and it looked really bad. It was insane how many times they just gave the ball right back to Lemoyne to lose an 11-point lead in the final 4 minutes of that game, and it got to within one possession, I think, just because Merrimack just couldn't even hold on to the basketball. So that would scare me a little bit in that one, although I expect Merrimack to be able to win and be pretty motivated, extra motivated, especially because they won last year and were not eligible for the tournament. And then the WCC actually finishes tonight. That and the Summit Championship is also tonight as well. WCC is Gonzaga, St. Mary's. Gonzaga is up to a 3-point favorite. I think people kind of realize Gonzaga is still the better team now at this point, but they're the 2 seed and St. Mary's is the 1. But I think Gonzaga is still playing with a chip on their shoulder now, even though they beat St. Mary's on the road to end the season. I think Gonzaga's not done yet. I think they've been the team in this conference for so long. I think it kind of rubs them the wrong way to not be the 1 seed here. So I agree with this line movement here that I kind of lean to the Gonzaga side, but it's not going to be a game I'm going to jump in on and play. But I do think that they're the slightly better team, and I think that they are going to be a little bit angrier than St. Mary's, maybe, that they're not the 1 seed. Both of these teams are going to be in the NCAA tournament at this point. They're both going to be in the big dance without question, I think. I think it might have been a little bit questionable if one of these teams fell short last night, but that didn't happen. I think both teams kind of got through easily, which was kind of expected as this tournament sets up their top seeds with a lot of buys, giving them quite an advantage here. So it seems like it's always Gonzaga, St. Mary's 1 and 2, but it's usually Gonzaga the 1, though. So I think that is going to motivate them a little bit more because I think they know that they're the better team still, and they kind of want to prove that out and win this. This is going to be a rubber match, really, because these teams were 1-1 during the regular season, and each one on the road. Kind of interesting there. And then in the Summit, you have the 1 seed, I believe, in South Dakota State still alive there against the 7 Denver, who keeps winning, although these are kind of mild upsets that they're pulling off. They beat the 6 seed Omaha last night, who had knocked out the 3, who was North Dakota, I think, who was actually maybe the 3rd best team in the conference, whereas I think St. Thomas was probably the 2nd best team. And South Dakota State actually beat St. Thomas yesterday, I believe. So that was kind of that was the championship, really, as far as some people are concerned, people that follow the Summit Conference. But does that mean that South Dakota State's going to not be in a good spot here just because that was the game that they really wanted to win more last night against a better team than Denver here? Will they overlook Denver a little bit? I don't know, maybe, but South Dakota's up from 8.5 to a 9-point favorite, so I don't expect them to lose this game. I do expect this to be another end to another Cinderella run for Denver as they run into a team that's significantly better than they are in South Dakota State. We'll see what happens. I kind of wanted St. Thomas to get here just because it would set up a betting opportunity because they're ineligible for the NCAA tournament. So if they'd gotten here, they would be playing to win this conference, and they would not have the big dance to be looking forward to. So that would have been an opportunity to bet on St. Thomas here, but they did not make it here. So this game is for a ticket to the big dance for both of these teams. Denver, I believe Denver hasn't even really been close to this for, I don't know, maybe even in their history. This might be their first Summit Championship appearance in their history. I think they might have been in either a different conference or not even in D1 up until fairly recently. So you could argue that makes this a bit of a game where maybe they're just playing loose because the expectations are really low on them, whereas South Dakota State, they're kind of expected to be here in this conference most years. They're one of the teams that just is one of the better teams in this conference every single year pretty much, but I still kind of expect them to just wind up winning this game because they do also have the experience being in a game like this. Although the same could be said for Wagner over Merrimack in the Northeastern Conference, although Merrimack got to the championship game and won it last year, so that gives them a little bit of experience under their belt as well. A bunch of the other conference, all of college basketball regular season is officially over now, and all the games tonight are in conference tournaments. Some of the bigger conferences are starting tonight. It's that Tuesday where you have the worst teams in some of the bigger conferences playing, and I'm going to be on one of these games, actually, just one of them. The only game I'm going to be on is college basketball, and it's I don't know if it's going to get a little bit questionable, but I'm going to be taking the points with West Virginia plus 10. I think it's going to be Cincinnati. Looks like they went, or plus 10.5 actually. Cincinnati looks like they've gone up from 8 through the 10 to 10.5, and I just don't quite understand the line move being this crazy, and maybe it is just entirely recency bias because Cincinnati just beat West Virginia in an absolute dominant performance. So Cincinnati shot 59% from the floor, which is probably something that's not going to happen again, whereas West Virginia was only at 38.9. West Virginia actually outshot them from three-point range, but Cincinnati dominated them on the boards, and West Virginia lost the turnover battle pretty bad. So kind of an outlier field goal percentage for Cincinnati in that game. And also the turnovers maybe a little bit unpredictable, but that was also at Cincinnati, which not a familiar environment for these Big 12 teams to go to because Cincinnati is a newcomer in the Big 12, which is going to factor into this handicap here. Cincinnati was an 11.5 point favorite in that game at home, and now they're laying almost the same on the road, or well, not on the road, in a neutral site game. And not only is it a neutral site game, it's up in Kansas City, but Cincinnati, them being a newcomer to the Big 12, they're not used to playing in this Big 12 tournament, man. And West Virginia, even though they've had kind of a revolving door of players this year, they're a program that's obviously used to playing in the Big 12 tournament because they've been in the Big 12 for years now at this point. So this is a familiar environment to West Virginia, whereas for Cincinnati, it is not. So I think that leads into this handicap a little bit. Cincinnati, of course, they're coming off blowing out West Virginia in the season finale at home. This was the last game that both of these teams played. They won 92-56. Totally embarrassing. And I think that's going to motivate West Virginia a bit coming into this game. If you're West Virginia, you don't want to end your season on a note like that. You get a redo here. You get a mulligan basically against the same team that just did that to you. You have the adjustments to make, whereas if you're Cincinnati, you have no adjustments to make, really, and you're going to be in an unfamiliar venue, potentially, whereas for West Virginia, it'll be less of an unfamiliar venue. West Virginia, they're going to be the team that I think is playing with a bit more motivation here, just because I think they're not going to want to let that last result stand. They don't want their season to finish that way, man. They want to at least put up a better performance, a fight, a game that's not as embarrassing as that. And people are probably going to forget because people are going to look at that game and think, holy shit, West Virginia has no chance here. They're obviously the worst, the worst of these teams. Not that Cincinnati's that great, but West Virginia has the worst record in this conference. And this is a very down year for them. They've been struggling. They had a lot of injuries and a lot of new faces on this team or whatever, but people forget West Virginia actually did beat Cincinnati in West Virginia this year too, which again, that was an unfamiliar place for Cincinnati to go to because they're not used to having to go to West Virginia either. So West Virginia actually split the season series with them. So West Virginia beat them at home. They lost horribly to Cincinnati in the final game of the season just a few days ago. So where does the reality lie? Well, I think the reality lies somewhere in between the two. And I think getting 10.5 points here, the line being only 1 point off from where it was in the game at Cincinnati, I think is a little bit crazy. I think this line should be closer to maybe somewhere in the 8 to 9 range. I think KenPom has this somewhere around 9. So I think recency bias is factoring in here, man. I think Cincinnati's being favored by too much. Cincinnati's not a team that really puts up high scoring performances either. They're a team that plays some defense, and they're not exactly a fast-paced team. They're not like terribly slow either, but they're in the slower half of teams, and they play better defense than offense. They're not a very good scoring team, although they're still better at both than West Virginia, of course. West Virginia, pretty bad, and West Virginia actually plays slightly faster than Cincinnati does, but still, Cincinnati's not a team that really is a team that like will score a lot and has a really good offense, a good enough offense to cover huge numbers like this, really, even though, of course, they did in their season finale. But I expect there to be a bit of a regression here based on everything that I'm seeing here. So for all those reasons, I will grab the points with West Virginia at plus 10.5 in that one, and that will be the only college basketball game I am on. You might be able to say the same thing for Oklahoma State against Central Florida, because Central Florida is not used to being in this Big 12 tournament either. So maybe taking the points with Oklahoma State, but that is one that I don't like as much. Like, I like the Cincinnati one more because of the style of play and because of the extremely lopsided result in the previous game that both of these teams played, which sets up kind of a zigzag. Whereas UCF, yeah, they did actually go on the road and beat Oklahoma State a few games back, and they played like a few tough games like to end the season, playing at Iowa State versus Houston and not losing those games by that much, and then winning on the road as underdogs against TCU. So UCF coming into this game against Oklahoma State, yeah, I don't know. Oklahoma State finished the season on a big loss streak. So I do kind of lean to Oklahoma State there too for all those reasons, and the unfamiliarity aspect of it for UCF playing their first Big 12 tournament as well. And that's going to be in one of the earlier games, but that's one that I like a little bit less. And UCF has gone up from a 3.5 to a 5-point favorite. That's one where UCF like are kind of, even though Cincinnati's kind of clearly the better team, they're laying like so many more points. Like UCF is laying fewer points than you would kind of want to see if you want to go against them. And UCF's a very unlucky team according to KenPom this year, and has a very, very good defense, actually 12th in the nation according to KenPom. So that's one that I'm just going to stay off of a little bit, even though KenPom has the line kind of right in line with where it is. I do still lean to Oklahoma State there a little bit just because of the situation, but KenPom, I think, has that line around 4. And the other thing I will say about Cincinnati is that Cincinnati, if one of these teams has any pressure out of these two, it would be Cincinnati, because Cincinnati, they've been kind of considered to be on the bubble. I think now they kind of realize they're not on the bubble anymore because they're not being talked about. So they are probably not playing with that amount of pressure. But West Virginia is playing with absolutely no pressure. I mean, they know they're not going anywhere. So they have nothing. They have nothing on their shoulders here in this game. The only thing that they're going to want, I think, is they're going to be able to play loose, and they're going to want to play a lot better than they did in their previous game, which I think will just motivate them a bit. They'll want to show up in this game. And also, they want to kind of like defend the Big 12 tournament against one of these newcomers here. They don't want a newcomer to come in and beat them in a tournament that they're used to playing in. So I like West Virginia in that one. And like I said, Oklahoma State a little bit for kind of similar reasons. And we'll see what happens in all these other tournaments. ACC, their worst teams are playing today. The MAAC is starting today in their tournament. The A10 has some of their lower seeds playing today. The Big 12 is in the semifinals, with every single game in that tournament has been an upset, except for Montana winning as a favorite last night, which is crazy. The 3 of the top 4 seeds are all out already in that tournament, which is really wild. Both favorites are actually looking like they're getting some of the money in the games tonight, though, with the line moving on those teams. So I don't know. And then Conference USA has their opening round tonight as well. And the Southland Conference is continuing into, actually, they're in the semifinal round now. So their top 2 teams are finally playing, with McNeese and A&M Corpus Christi. And those teams have had multiple buys coming into this with the way that's structured. So I don't know if those teams are going to be a little bit cold, but we hope that McNeese can get through that tournament, because they are far and away the best team in that conference. But you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes these teams slip up, and it is basically a tragedy in some of those cases where that happens. We'll move to the NBA. We got a couple of games here. One of the more interesting games on the slate here is the T-Wolves and the Clippers, with the Clippers up to a 7-point favor from 6 with juice, but 91% of tickets on them, 54% of the cash. So very public Clippers team, but way less of the cash on them. So I think the public may be reacting to the fact that Towns is obviously going to be out for a while now. For the T-Wolves, unclear when he's going to be back, if he's going to even be back in time for playoffs or anything like that. We don't know at this point, but so I would kind of lean to the T-Wolves in this one if we knew like what the personnel was going to be in this game, because the Clippers are coming off a pretty tough game against the Bucks where they fell short. That was a big game, national TV game, tough game, whereas Minnesota, I think they're going to be in a more embarrassed mode because they lost kind of worse to the Cavaliers and to the Lakers, but now they're playing a 4th straight road game as well, and those are still pretty good teams that they just lost to, although Cavs without Donovan Mitchell, so I don't know. But we're going to see what happens in this game because there are so many moving parts in this game that there's no way I'm going to jump in on this with for Minnesota. Gobert and Edwards both may not play in this game. They're both game time decisions. We don't know if they're going to play in this game. Gobert, I guess, was just fined for a gesture towards an official. I don't know. I kind of like Gobert. I don't know. I just kind of think it's funny, but he and Edwards are dealing with some injuries, but the Clippers have some injuries as well. Like they played that Bulls game a couple games ago with a shell of a team, basically. And I think they might have played with a shell of a team in their most recent game against the Bucks too, and they still played them pretty tough and played them close. Yeah, so that was basically with Harden and a bunch of scrubs because they're still without Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. So, and they're both game time decisions tonight. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be looking to play this game. You got to see who's actually going to wind up in the lineups tonight because a bunch of star players on both sides are all game time decisions in that game. So way too many moving parts for me to want to get involved in that. What I will do is jump on the New York Knicks for one of the two games that I'll be on. They're actually up from 4.5 to 6.5, which is kind of unfortunate. So you got to lay the 6.5 if you're going to lay it with the Knicks now. They're public somehow with 92% of the tickets, 94% of the cash on them. I don't see how they could really be that public, though. I think the public perception, I think, is going to look at this and think, well, the Knicks have been playing ugly. They can't score, really. And they're up against the 76ers team that's dealing with a lot of injuries. Some of their best players have been injured. But even so, I think the public, I would think that they would look at this and think that this number is just too high. Too much of a number to be laying with the Knicks, which is why I think I'm going to jump in on this one. And maybe the line will actually come down. I don't know if I would say it's going to come down a little bit just because I see so many of the tickets and the cash percentage on them. It looks like the cash discrepancy is on the Knicks, and we've seen line movement on the side of the Knicks. The Knicks are coming off a totally embarrassing loss to the 76ers. In the previous game, the Knicks were a 7.5-point favorite in that game, and they lost 79-73. How could you have such a low-scoring game? And that's ugly on the part of both teams, but especially if you're on the losing side of that and you only score 73 points. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And there was some crazy stuff going on there. I think there were some fights going on in that game. So these teams definitely don't like each other. It's a division rivalry. The Knicks, having lost that game, are now only one game ahead of the Philadelphia 76ers. And, of course, the Celtics are just running away with this division at this point. But both these teams are still fighting for getting into the playoffs and whatever and fighting for the 2 spot in the division. So I think this is a zigzag for the Knicks, man. I mean, they lost that game ugly, only scoring 73 points. And now we're getting a little bit better on the line here with 6.5, although Maxey is probably going to be coming back for the 76ers in this game, though. So I don't know if that means this line's going to drop a little bit. Is he only worth 1 point to the 76ers? I don't know. But this line opened at 4.5. So I think that was also probably expecting Maxey to come back. So maybe that's just because so many bettors just jumped in on the Knicks at the lower number. I unfortunately missed that, but I think if you get it at below 7, I kind of like this because with Maxey coming back, you're still going to get like the reverse injured player theory spot a little bit. You're still getting a little bit of value in the line here with the Knicks having been a bigger favorite in the previous game, although I think that's now mostly accounted for because of the Maxey return. But with Maxey coming back, the 76ers just won this previous game between these two teams a couple days ago without Maxey. So having to work him back into the lineup is probably going to be a bit of a change. Like they're going to have to adjust to that being the case, whereas the Knicks are going to be the team that has adjustments to make as far as them playing a poor brand of basketball in that previous game. Whereas as far as that's concerned, you're Philadelphia, whatever you did in that last game worked, and you have to work Maxey back in. So I think that makes it a bad spot for Philadelphia. It becomes kind of a reverse injured player theory spot plus the zigzag on top of it. And the line just looks really, really ridiculous to be laying 6.5 with a team that really doesn't play great offense in the New York Knicks. But I'll lay it with the Knicks. I think it's the zigzag spot. I think it's a better spot for them for those reasons. We'll jump on it with the New York Knicks. And then the other game I will jump on, even though we've seen the line move in the other direction, is going to be to fade the Milwaukee Bucks. 89% of the tickets are on the Bucks, 63% of the cash. So they are the public road favorite here with less of the cash than the tickets on them. So the cash discrepancy is against them. They are public. They have the majority of the cash and the tickets. So you know what tends to happen in those ones. Those are road favorites that you tend to want to fade. And it almost looks too easy to take the Bucks in some ways, because I think even though Giannis is kind of listed as a game time decision, I think it's pretty confirmed that he is playing in this game tonight. I don't know what the status of Chris Middleton is, but Middleton has missed a lot of time for the Bucks this year, so I don't think that matters that much. But this spot for the Bucks is just real bad. They're playing a 5th straight road game now, even though they have had time off between all these games. But they're still playing. They're playing a 6th, they're playing a 4th game in 7 days. So that's not great. And all of them being on the road. They just came off after they got blown out in their first road game against the Warriors. They played a much better game, but fell just short, falling by 1 to the LA Lakers in a TV game, a big time game there. That was a battle for both teams, a very tough game. And then they played another tough game, staying in the city of LA, I think playing in the same arena, I guess, beating the Clippers, who are one of the top teams in the NBA. But the Clippers, of course, you have to remember the Clippers are playing without some of their players. Like I said, it was basically just Harden and company there without some of their best players there besides him. They were missing key components there. So the Bucks were able to, that's still a big win for the Bucks, but it also might look better than it is to the average guy that's just going to come in and say, oh, the Bucks just beat the Clippers on the road. The Bucks, they're a good team here, man. Of course, we're going to grab the Bucks basically to just win the game here against the Sacramento Kings. If they can do that to the Clippers, yeah. But again, keeping in mind, if you dig into that box score, of course, the Clippers are missing multiple of their best players. Like I said, Kawhi Leonard didn't play in that game, and neither did who was the other player that I mentioned who's out for the I don't even remember who else is out for the Clippers. They have so many players on the injury report. Paul George. So yeah, both of those teams did not play in that game, and that kind of sets up a spot where the Bucks might just be feeling a little bit overconfident, and it's not a good spot playing a final road game here. Although, yeah, they're going to want to split the road trip, sure, but it's still a tough spot playing a 4th road game in a row. They get the Kings. The Kings, I think, are in a much better spot to bounce back because they just played a bad game or a couple of bad games really on their own floor after they went to LA and beat the Lakers, which is a big win. They suffered kind of a letdown in the next game, coming back home and barely got past the Spurs, only winning that game by 2, giving up a lot of points to the Spurs. This Kings defense has not been good in these last few games. They've given up over 100 to every team they've played. They've given up at least 113 to every team they've played at least 112, to every team they played in the last several games, which is not good at all. And after that Spurs game that they barely escaped, they didn't play well again in their next game against the Houston Rockets and lost that game at home. So I don't think they're going to want to let that stand, man. And now they have one of the better teams in basketball coming in the Milwaukee Bucks. So I like taking the points with the Kings here. I think they're in a bounce back spot. They're going to want to be focused here. The market indicators appear to be indicating on the Kings. I think it's a worse spot for the Milwaukee Bucks here in this one, coming off a big performance, a bigger game, and having all these road games, whereas the Kings are in the much better travel spot, just staying at home. And I think they're just sitting around kind of pissed off after a couple of bad performances. They're going to want to put in a much better performance here. So I like it better for the Sacramento Kings here in this one. And then we'll go to the NHL, where I got a couple of plays in the NHL. One is going to be on the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have been playing horrible hockey recently. Both of these teams have been playing very poorly, though. One of these teams has to win pretty much, right? I mean, it goes to shootouts now. So one of these teams has to not lose at this point. Pittsburgh has flipped from a plus 100 dog to a minus 111 favorite. I think you can get them at minus 110 out there right now. I don't like the fact that 60% of the tickets are on them, but 90% of the cash looks like it's over on the other side, on the Ottawa side. So I don't like how it looks like a pros versus Joes with the pros taking Ottawa, but I don't get it. I don't see why they would be, because this spot for Ottawa is not good, man. They're returning from a road trip, even though they do have 2 days off, but it's still a road trip return. It's just bizarre that it's just a single game at home and then they have to go out on the road again. So I still think that might be a distraction, because Pittsburgh hasn't been playing that well recently. They have Pittsburgh coming in. They're returning home from a road trip that took them out to the Pacific Coast for 3 games, where they played pretty tough in all those games, even though they lost all of them. They lost all of them by 1 goal, although 2 of them were to bad teams, but to Anaheim and San Jose, but they played tough in all of them, and they also lost in overtime against LA. Now they're coming back home, and they go immediately back out on the road again to play Columbus and the Islanders starting on Thursday. So it's like they're not going to be at home for very long, which tends to kind of add to the distractions. Even though they do have an extra day off here, I think it is still going to be a distracted return home spot here, and they don't have that much time before they have to go out on the road again. It's one of these weird single home games between 2 road trips, which is weird. You see this happening a little bit more often in the NBA than in the NHL. I think it's still rare in both. That's kind of a rare spot. Ottawa, not a very good team. The line is still telling you that Pittsburgh is still the slightly better team, but look at what Pittsburgh has done recently. So Ottawa at least has looked like the more competitive team. Pittsburgh has just looked horrific in their last 3 games. They've lost 6 of their last 7, but in their most recent 3 losses, they've been outscored by a combined 20-1. And they beat Columbus before that. But if you take into account the other loss to Edmonton before that, they've been outscored 26-2 in their last 4 losses. So who in their right mind is going to want to play well on either of these teams, really? But who's going to want to play on Pittsburgh after all those ugly losses? But keep in mind that 2 of those losses were to Edmonton. One was to Washington, who's been playing pretty decent hockey. And then the other one was to the Bruins, who are also obviously a good team. So they haven't been losing to bad teams in that stretch. They've been getting blown out by some of the better teams in hockey, although they haven't been playing well. But now I think it's going to be the turnaround. They get to leave home again after another pretty ugly loss. They get to go out on the road to play one single road game, which I think they're going to have reason to focus on this, because they're coming off a bunch of ugly losses, just losing by a ton and not being able to score at all. I think playing Ottawa might be the cure that the doctor ordered, really, because they get to finally face a lesser opponent here. So they're actually going to be stepping down in class from the teams that they've been playing. And the last time they stepped down in class was against Columbus, and they won the game. So I think it's a better spot for Pittsburgh here for all those reasons. So I like Pittsburgh there. They get to go out on the road and just kind of focus on hockey and put those home distractions behind them and not have to hear about how bad they've been playing from the local media and whatever. Get to go out on the road, not hear about any of that. Focus on the hockey game here. So I like the spot better for Pittsburgh, whereas with Ottawa, they're coming back home into a distraction spot. So we'll be on the Pittsburgh side, even though the market, the money, the cash discrepancy looks like it's against it, but it also looks like the line has moved in the Pittsburgh direction. So it's kind of hard to read what's actually going on there. And then the other game is going to be a game where I'm just taking a shot on a bigger money line underdog here, because I think it's a bad spot for Minnesota. And this is just going to be to fade Minnesota here. Playing on an Arizona team that's been playing really horrendous hockey, though. But I think you can take a shot on the underdog here. And you're basically just saying that they maybe have like a 40-something% chance to win this game. So it's worth taking the decent underdog money line price here. And you're not saying that you actually expect them to win the game. You're just saying you expect them to win more often than what the odds are indicating here. So Minnesota, they're public. They're a minus 190 favorite, 96% of the tickets, 98% of the cash. So they do have a little bit of the cash discrepancy. I don't know about that, but I know they're certainly going to be the public team because they've been playing better hockey. They're the team with the better record here. Everybody knows they're the better team, but they're coming off a couple of tough games, man. They just went to Colorado and lost in overtime in elevation. That's a tough game. And they came out of that and didn't suffer a hangover. And they beat Nashville coming out of that somehow, which I think was a come from behind maybe against Nashville too. Nashville did have a 2-1 lead against them, but that was the only lead they had in that game. It was a close game pretty much. And Minnesota won that in overtime. So now they've played 2 overtime games in a row very tough against Colorado, and then a pretty big divisional matchup against Nashville, who's ahead of Minnesota in their division. Pretty big win to get there. 2 overtime games, and now they step down and they have to face an Arizona team who they just beat twice on the road in the last month or so. They just beat them the game before the Colorado game. They went to Arizona and beat them 5-2, and they beat them 3-1 back on February 14th on the road as well. So they've beaten Arizona twice on the road. So it's almost like kind of double road reversal revenge for Arizona, but it might mean that Minnesota might take Arizona a little bit lightly here. And they're in a spot where I think they're in the less rested spot and maybe in a bit of a letdown / hangover spot, coming off 2 bigger games, tough games that both went into overtime, facing Arizona. Whereas if you're Arizona here, you're going to want to right the ship here, man. Arizona, they just had a really, really hideous loss streak, which I believe that started before the All-Star break, and then coming out of the All-Star break was not the cure for it, and it continued, and they lost so many games in a row, and then finally won a couple of games, and they stepped down in class to face Ottawa. They were able to beat Washington, and then they beat Detroit in there, but they had those couple of losses to Minnesota mixed in there. Most of these teams that they've lost to, man, they've faced a pretty brutal schedule. Like, most of the teams they've lost to are some of the better teams in hockey. Look at these losses, man. Florida, Tampa Bay, Carolina, Vegas, Nashville, Philadelphia, Minnesota, Carolina, Colorado, Edmonton, Toronto, Winnipeg, and then a loss to Montreal, and there's one of the only bad losses, really. And then Toronto again. I mean, it's like most of the games that they've lost are to good teams, so it's not like you can really blame them for a lot of these losses. However, their most recent 2 out of their most recent 3 losses. So their most recent 3 losses are the 5-2 loss at home to Minnesota, and then a 5-2 loss that was before that at home to Chicago. And then they just went on the road in their most recent game and lost to start a road trip, lost to Chicago 7-4. That is totally embarrassing, man. I think Arizona, they're going to want to be focused here and bounce back here. They're facing a Minnesota team that just came into their house and beat them very recently on the 7th, and also beat them back in the middle of February. I think they're going to be focused here on this Minnesota team. They're going to want to put together a better performance here. That Chicago game, at least they were coming off a pretty decent win over a Detroit team that's been fairly hot, and they beat them 4-0. So maybe they were in a little bit of a letdown coming into that Chicago game. Now this is their 2nd straight road game, not really having to travel that far, facing Minnesota. Of course, Minnesota's staying at home here, but Minnesota's coming off a couple of bigger games than this. So I think Minnesota might have reason to not be as focused here, whereas Arizona, I think they're going to be pretty embarrassed off of some of these recent games, especially their most recent game, giving up 7 points to a Chicago team who's one of the worst teams in hockey. You're not going to want to let that stand if you're Arizona. So I'll just take the shot and play Arizona at plus 160 something on the money line. So you're not saying you expect them to win the game. Like I said, you're just, when you play money line games like this in hockey, you're just expecting to hit more than like 40 something, around 40% of these or so. And then you wind up actually profiting from those. So we'll do that, throw a bit of money on that, just enough money to win the same amount that you'd win on one of these like regular games where you're laying 11-10. So you're laying a lot less on a game like this to win more on this one, to win the same amount that you're playing the other games to win as well. So if it winds up losing, you also lose less than you lose on the other bets as well. So I think it's a risk worth taking there. So those plays, once again, I don't feel great about these plays, to be honest. It feels a little bit dicey, although sometimes when you feel that way, sometimes it works out okay, but we'll see. So in college basketball, in the Big 12 tournament, taking West Virginia plus 10.5. In the NBA, New York Knicks minus 6.5, Sacramento Kings plus 2.5. In hockey, in the NHL, Pittsburgh Penguins minus 110, and Arizona Coyotes plus 164. These just feel so ugly, but that's the name of the game, man. When you're a handicapper like this, you wind up looking for value, and there's usually the value to be had on the teams that have looked really bad in the recent games. So have a good one, man. Peace.